Let me now say a little bit about our AAA rating. One thing that the rating agencies look at is gross debt. Our gross debt is rising pretty quickly. Net debt is the most important determinant of government debt. I've just showed you gross debt here, just the pace at which it's been deteriorating, and the fact that the last budget isn't really giving us much comfort that they're doing much about it. They're talking about stabilising it eventually. But the red line is a AAA median, so that's the debt for all AAAs, average. And as you can see, whereas before the GFC in 06-07, that number was a lot lower than the AAA median. It's getting closer now. But the real worry for us is foreign debt. If you look at our foreign debt as a proportion of GDP, reflecting the high household debt, you can see that we are just totally out of the ballpark there. And the AAA median is much, much lower. So rating agencies, okay, we're rating you as a government, but we also know that one of the great vulnerabilities to an economy is too much foreign debt. Now, fortunately for us, most of that foreign debt is held by the banks who have it hedged back into Aussie dollars. We're not in a situation like Argentina or Mexico in the bad days when they had their foreign debt in US dollars, and that's a really dangerous situation to have. But still, I think we will eventually have to face an issue around our rating. If we think about what's happening in the Senate at the moment, we think about Hockey's policy in 2014, where he was trying to attack some of the welfare expenditure that Australia built up during the Howard years, when we had extraordinarily strong fiscal position as we were living off the prosperity of the mining boom, and Howard introduced a whole bunch of baby bonuses and family tax benefits and aggressive tax cuts, all of which we could afford at that time, but we can't afford now. But trying to unwind them will prove to be almost impossible given the structure of our Senate. So how might you make some great fiscal gains? Well, if we look on the other side of the balance sheet, on the tax side, we can't raise corporate taxes or personal taxes. That would be political suicide. We could broaden the GST. The GST is currently, if we broadened it to food and other, we'd raise about 18 billion extra a year. Of course, the problem with our GST is that it's too narrow. New Zealand has a broader GST, and they were able to get substantial income tax cuts by increasing their GST. In our situation, it's way too narrow, but politically, do you think we'll ever get away with raising the GST on food? The next two are the ones that, to me, look extraordinarily vulnerable, which are the subsidies for superannuation. So the first one is when your employer makes a contribution on your behalf, and you only pay 15% tax on that, regardless of what your marginal tax rate is. And when you think of it, it's marginal income that's going into super. If you're paying your marginal tax rate might be 50%, but you're only paying 15%. The cost of that subsidy is about 18 billion a year. So if you were suddenly having to pay the marginal tax rate on your employer's superannuation contributions, the government would raise about 18 billion. Now, what it would mean is that your super pool would grow more slowly, but politically, maybe that's an easier thing to get around than directly taxing people. And of course, policies around that were certainly discussed before the election. One way was to say, okay, what we'll do is that we'll tax you on your marginal tax rate minus 20%. So if your marginal tax rate's 40, then we'll tax you at 20% rather than at 15%. And that was considered to be something that was worth doing the numbers on. That will continue to me to be a consideration. The third one is the tax on super earnings. That's now 15%. Once again, if that was taxed at your marginal tax rate, then the government would raise about another 15 billion. Both of those numbers are huge, but the offset, of course, is that if they were to introduce them, you'd get some fiscal repair now, but further down the track, the people's super pools would be less, so it may mean further down the track there'd be more reliance upon the pension system. So this is a trade-off that probably at the moment is too generous to superannuants, particularly high-income superannuants, and it may well come under some attack. As we know, the Labor Party wanted to change the discount on capital gains tax from 50% to 25%. As you recall, the history of the introduction of the capital gains tax was the venture capital industry went to the Treasurer at the time, Costello, and said, we're uncompetitive on capital gains tax, we're not attracting enough risk capital, can you address this? And the answer was yes. And then when they looked into it, they realised that it was just all too hard to give it to one particular sector. So he said, let's give it to everybody. The result, of course, has been that 95% of those benefits go to housing and equities, mainly on housing. So all we've done is that we've subsidised housing when the real objective of that was going to be to encourage risk investment. At the time, it wasn't considered to be that expensive because you were getting out of indexation. Well, now, of course, it's hugely expensive because indexation isn't worth much because inflation's so low. So that one, the Labor Party's mentioned it. I suspect that's another one that will be considered over the years as they realise that they're just not able to make the progress they would like on the expenditure side, given the structure of the Senate and given the fact that it's very difficult to get any agreement on major changes.